happened recently that stopped us mid-conversation, and we haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. Not because it was something dramatic that happened, but because it was precise, and because what one person said in response to it reveals something about conscious creation that most people never examine in themselves.
We were sitting in a coffee shop when a Labrador lay quietly at its owner's feet, calm, settled, completely at rest. Then a couple arrived, the husband pushing a pram with a sleeping baby, the wife pushing a second pram carrying three small dogs. The baby was silent, the dogs were not. Even contained, they were visibly stimulated, alert, reactive, straining toward everything around them. The contrast alone was striking. Then the wife reached in, lifted out the smallest dog, and walked it directly over to the Labrador. When the Labrador growled, low, steady, once, she looked up and said, "Oh, don't worry about him. He's just intimidated."
That sentence stayed with us because what went actually was the opposite of intimidation. The Labrador hadn't flinched, hadn't escalated, hadn't moved really. It had communicated something precise. This is my limit, one clean signal, then back to stillness. The woman hadn't received that signal as given. She had translated it. And in that translation, something got lost. Not just about the dog, but how we all process resistance when our identity is at stake.
That moment points to something most conscious creation conversations completely skip over: calibration. Not projection, not manifestation, not identity expansion. Calibration. The ability to issue and receive accurate signals without distorting them to protect your self-image. What the woman did was has a name in psychology. It's attribution bias. When feedback challenges how we see ourselves, the mind reframes the cause to preserve status. Rather than asking whether she'd crossed a boundary, and the walkover was a deliberate choice, she concluded the Labrador felt threatened. That conclusion kept her sense of authority intact. It also meant she walked away with less accurate information than she arrived with, and no awareness of that loss.
Conscious creation communities are good at encouraging an expansive self concept. They rarely warn about what happens when that expansion becomes overextension, when identity inflates beyond proportion. Every response, including neutral ones, gets interpreted as confirmation of that inflation. Even resistance starts to feel like proof of power. The feedback loop quietly inverts, and the creator never notices.
There's a nervous system dimension worth sitting with here. The Labrador was regulated: slow breathing, steady posture, minimal movement. The growl wasn't distress, it was a threshold signal, a precise marker of where tolerance ended before escalation would begin. Then, once communicated, the dog simply returned to rest. No rumination, no replaying the moment, no drama, just information delivered and complete. What makes the scene so striking is that the sleeping baby in the other pram was doing exactly the same thing, completely regulated, unbothered. Two entirely different creatures demonstrating the same internal coherence, while three small dogs and one adult woman could not.
Most people, when they feel their threshold approaching, do one of two things. They suppress the signal entirely to appear unbothered, or they overreact and escalate. Neither is regulation. Suppression stores the charge, escalation depletes it. The Labrador did neither. It discharged the tension precisely at the right moment in the right measure. That is a skill, and like most skills, it requires honest self awareness before it becomes available. This is where people frequently confuse stability with dominance. Stability doesn't chase engagement. It doesn't require any validation. It maintains internal coherence. and communicates clearly when its edges are reached. What the Labrador demonstrated wasn't aggression, it was authority, the kind that doesn't need anyone else to confirm it.
Proportional response is one of the most reliable markers of mature leadership. Leaders who escalate unnecessarily erode trust. Those who under-respond invite intrusion. Precision means responding to what the situation actually requires, not what the ego needs to perform. The Labrador sat precisely in the center. It didn't abandon composure, but it didn't permit violation either. One growl, no follow-through necessary. Compare that to the reinterpretation that followed, which required building an entire narrative to explain away a signal that was in itself completely clear. In systems thinking, corrupted feedback means the system starts reacting to invented variables. The woman walked away responding to a story that she'd constructed. The Labrador's actual communication, clean, proportionate, resolved, had been replaced by a more flattering version of the events. That's not a small thing. It's the kind of drift that quietly degrades a creator's ability to read reality accurately, one small interpretation at a time.
There's also a consent layer here that doesn't get enough attention. The Labrador's stillness was consent to coexist. That consent held through the couple arriving. The prior was the noise of 3 agitated dogs. The line was crossed when a deliberate choice was made to lift one animal out and walk it into the Labrador's space. The growl was the withdrawal of consent. Not an attack, not a declaration of dominance, just a boundary being named in response to a boundary being crossed. If you've been taught that silence is jealousy, distance is weakness, and resistance is proof of your power, you lose the ability to distinguish between those things and their neutral counterparts. Withdrawal stops being information. It becomes a story about you. And that story, however flattering, costs you clarity.
One more layer worth naming, skill. The size difference between those dogs and the Labrador was quite obvious. Yet, skill didn't determine emotional posture. The larger animal was steady. The smaller was reactive. The woman's comment inverted that, psychologically repositioning the larger, calmer presence as the threatened one, maintaining her sense of control over the scene. Personal development does this constantly. Rejection becomes proof of desirability. Silence becomes proof of impact. Opposition becomes proof of power. When every response gets filtered through a lens of self-confirmation, perception loses its grounding. When you consistently reframe neutral or negative signals as confirmation of your greatness, you stop developing the instincts genuine authority depends on. Feedback stops landing. The gap between how you see yourself and how you actually show up quietly widens, often without you ever knowing it happened.
The risk embedded in spiritual language is real. When people are told they create their reality, some will hear that as every external response confirms my internal state. But that's not creation, that's confirmation bias with metaphysical branding. It keeps identity intact while quietly removing every opportunity for genuine recalibration. The Labrador offered a moment of recalibration. The woman didn't take it. There isn't a judgment, it's just merely an observation. The capacity to adjust in real time without the ego collapsing is one of the most advanced and least discussed aspects of conscious creation. Rigidity in the face of accurate feedback isn't strength. It's the fear of finding out you need to adjust.
Which brings us back to this. Proportion preserves clarity. Distortion preserves ego. The most powerful creators aren't the ones who can expand their identity without limit. They're the ones who can hold authority steady, receive a clean signal without rewriting it, and then return to rest.
The Labrador required no reinterpretation to remain composed. No narrative, no performance. That's the difference between internal authority and performed authority. One needs the moment to cooperate, the other simply doesn't. One growl back to stillness, settled, intact, unbothered. That return is the whole lesson.
If this conversation has sharpened something in you, stay with us. These discussions are built slowly and deliberately, and they deepen over time. You can support this by describing, sharing the episode with someone who values thoughtful inquiry, and turning on notifications so that you do not miss what comes next. Quiet growth compounds. We will continue. Until next time, think differently, dream boldly, and create consciously.